Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Smells Like Business, a podcast for anyone who wants to learn more about the current and future state of cannabis in Europe. Every episode we talk to different business owners and cannabis specialists, making it easier for you to enter and better understand the cannabis industry. On this episode, we have Mike Wise on the show. Mike is a man of many talents who has, for many years now, been a strong cannabis activist and believes everyone should be given the opportunity to have access to this plant and its many magical and medicinal properties. Mike has his own cannabis show called The Mike Wise Show, which I highly recommend checking out on YouTube or Facebook. He has also made a couple of cannabis-related documentaries and has had the pleasure of filming and in the process becoming friends with none other than Rick Simpson, from whom he learnt to make Rick Simpson oil, otherwise known as high THC cannabis oil. He even has his own company called OG Labs Genetics, where he sells this oil as well as seeds. Mike tells us his fascinating story, the role activism has played in his life and his businesses, what RSO, Rick Simpson oil, or high THC cannabis oil actually is, and the importance of letting people grow their own cannabis, especially for medical purposes. As Mike likes to say, patience over profit. So, let's dive in. Hi Mike, welcome to the show. How's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here, brother.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you. So yeah, we met a year ago, almost to the day, in Prague at Cannabis, and you were giving a talk there, which was really captivating and truly inspiring, where you were telling us the importance of activism and telling us your story. But I don't want to give away too much because it'd be nice for our listeners to hear it all from you yourself.
Cool. Thanks. I'm excited.
Great. So maybe let's start from the beginning. How did you end up in this wonderful world of cannabis?
I'm from Texas originally, and I was a sponsored professional skateboarder, so I traveled around the country in Canada and Mexico to go to competitions for various sponsors, so I was on the road a lot. This was probably around end of high school, beginning of university. And unfortunately, my first year at university, I had an incident, and I busted my knee completely. I tore all the ligaments doing a trick. And fast forward a few years, I have a career where I'm working with live broadcast television, doing sports broadcasting mainly. So now I'm kind of traveling around, still living the same lifestyle, just always on the road for work, for filming, football, baseball, basketball, tennis, all sorts of different things. And so basically during this time, I started to develop symptoms like really bloating, nausea, uncomfortable feeling all day, every day. After years of living this kind of life on the road and eating terrible processed foods and things from fast food restaurants, it just started to get worse and worse. And eventually I came to learn that I had Crohn's disease. I basically got Crohn's disease. And the way this came about was fast forward another 10 years. I'm living in Colorado, and I'm filming a movie which is called Illegally Alive, which anybody listening to this can watch right now for free. You just go to YouTube and type in Illegally Alive. It's a documentary that follows a few families that relocated to Colorado from other states in order to gain access to medical cannabis, typically for their children. And so the main character of my story, he had Crohn's disease. I hadn't even really heard about Crohn's disease, but I start living with this family, basically, and we're going all sorts of places everywhere. I'm with them constantly, and I find out that, oh, wow, all the symptoms he has, I have these symptoms. And I've just been dealing with them for 10, 15 years now. So when I was filming this movie, I also found out about Rick Simpson oil. I saw a lot about Rick Simpson, this man who made a cannabis oil to cure his cancer and kind of gave it away out to his neighbors for free. And so I was filming this movie and finding out I have Crohn's disease, and then I find out about Rick and Rick Simpson oil specifically. And I think, well, if this oil can work for cancer, imagine what it could do for Crohn's disease. I mean, surely it can cure Crohn's disease. And so basically, I ended up taking this high THC cannabis oil. And so pretty much from my first dose, I noticed immediate relief of my symptoms. And so at the worst point of my disease, I could really not sleep more than 4 hours in a night because,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I would have to wake up and go vomit. That's just what happened. I'd wake up.
Was it that bad?
Yeah, it was that bad. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it just wore on me because I wasn't getting sleep. And I wasn't eating either, really. I wasn't eating properly. I could only eat like a quarter of a meal. It was really a sad state to be in. And so then, like, after taking the first dose, the first day, I ate like 3 huge meals. I slept 8 hours, maybe even longer than that.
And did you make it yourself or did you have to go purchase it?
I did make it myself, and this is something that you might find a little bit baffling. Maybe some of your listeners might. But in Colorado, it was actually very difficult to find access to this oil, at least at the time when I was living there in 2014 or 2016, in that 2 year span. So I made it myself from watching Rick's videos online. I did it pretty much exactly the same way.
Actually, what is Rick Simpson oil, RSO, and how do you actually make it?
The easiest way I could explain it, especially to someone who might not even be familiar with cannabis at all, is that it's basically the essential extracts from the plant. So it's just taking the main things that you need and washing them off with like a solvent, and then you boil the solvent off, and all you're left with is the main things from the plant, basically, and none of the plant material. So kind of the stuff that provides medical benefits, and plant material is kind of useless. I hate to say that, but in comparison to medical value, plant material holds very little compared to the actual cannabinoids that are found in the plant. So Rick Simpson oil is what I basically call high THC, full spectrum cannabis oil, and it's an oil that's comprised mainly of pure THC and pure cannabinoids, and that's what our body needs to nourish the endocannabinoid systems within us.
Yeah. And I think what's very important is this entourage effect. So using the full spectrum, using all the cannabinoids of the plant, but whether you want it to be stronger in CBD or THC, that might be a personal preference. So another really cool and interesting thing I know you've done is you went to Croatia to film Rick Simpson. How did that all come about?
I sent him a message and he responded. Of course, I was pretty blown away at this because I sent a message to at least 30 other people who are well known for cannabis use, or, the celebrities and the Woody Harrelson types. I sent pretty much the same email to all these people, and he was the only one to respond. And so I thought that was cool. So when I got that message, he told me, well, we could do a Skype interview because, I do live in Croatia now. And I just wanted to have like high quality footage. So I told him I'd like to go to film him in person. And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And then that's when I was kind of there for 2 weeks, I believe. This was in 2016 in November. So all we did was talk. I just kind of expressed my concerns with the government, and he kind of radicalized me a little bit more in terms of this cannabis. Because in the US, a lot of the policy and people who tell you about policy regarding cannabis tell you to like appease politicians, to basically beg politicians, and that this is the way to get cannabis laws passed in your favor. My father is a politician. So I was very used to this. I was going to the Capitol in Colorado and speaking to the politicians and Senate committees about any bill that was coming up regarding cannabis. I was giving, my opinion on it and why I supported or didn't support the bill. And so when I got to Rick and hanging out with him, he was really just kind of like, screw these guys. They're all crooked. All the laws regarding cannabis are crooked. The plant should never have been outlawed in the first place. And he kind of just really ingrained this in me for staying with him for so long. This is the main thing he kept telling me over and over. And, everything came back to this kind of thing. And I agreed because I could see that in other industries in the United States. I was kind of like, I hate the US. I hate the government. I hate what they're doing. So he was like, well, just come here and live with me. So I was like, yeah, cool, I'll do that. Like, and I don't know if he thought I was joking or not, but I was like, dude, give me a few months and I'll be back for sure. So that's what I did. I went back home. I like sold pretty much everything I owned, and I moved. I moved to Croatia. I lived there for 1 year, and I haven't gone back to the US since.
Yeah, and you've lived in a few places. I mean, last year when we met, you were living in Amsterdam, and then I think you lived in Spain for a while, and now you're in Warsaw. So yeah, you definitely get around.
Yeah, I like to like live at places for a few months. Kind of a cool thing. When I was in Amsterdam, I actually bought a caravan. It was like in April of 2019. So since then, I kind of just stopped renting an apartment, permanently, and then went to trying to live full time in a caravan. And now I kind of do like half and half. So I'll stay in the caravan about half the time, and then we'll rent apartments.
That's great. You can sort of just on a whim decide, okay, where's the next destination? Very, very cool. So I also know that you've got OG Labs Genetics. So why did you end up starting your own company?
I started my own company because I couldn't pay the bills as an activist. I left my job basically in the United States when I moved. So I started to sell seeds. I was in Amsterdam. So it was kind of easy for me to make the connections I needed to make this type of business. This took about a year to develop after me moving to Europe, and I started selling seeds. And while this year that I was gone, I got a lot of messages from people saying they need RSO, they need high THC cannabis oil, and they can't get it, and they can't get the materials to make it. And so, after a year of getting message after message after message like this on my page, because I have a page on Facebook that's dedicated to, getting information out about medical cannabis, then I decided to make it available again, because I was making it and selling it to people in the United States. In Colorado, actually, I would make it for free for people. The only requirement was bring me the materials. Don't pay me a dime for my time. Don't give me any money, period. Just give me the materials and the solvent, and I'll give you your oil for free. And I was doing this for quite a few people. And so I was like, I'm tired of hearing about these people getting ripped off and dying and stuff. So I decided to just make the oil available publicly as kind of a form of activism. And it's impossible for people to bring me the materials, so I have to charge, a flat rate that I need to collect in order to go buy the materials to make it. So I added that to my OG Labs website, oglabsgenetics.com. And that was about 3 years ago.
And then, of course, you've also got the show, The Mike Wise Show. I checked out a few episodes and I really enjoyed it. It's some good stuff. How did that all come about? What made you decide to start this little adventure?
Thanks. The first show was right around, I want to say April 20th of 2016.
You started on 420.
Yeah. And it was something
Nice.
that I did not plan. So I was just heavily involved within the cannabis community in Colorado, and it was kind of like a hub for the whole entire US at that time. I guess still is today. But someone just approached me. It was a friend of mine, and he was like, there's this new radio station in Colorado Springs on the FM dial. It was 98.5, I think. And he said, they're basically giving me a show, but I can't do it by myself. And would you like to help me? And I was like, well, what's it about? And he said, it's a show. We can talk about cannabis. The radio station is called Blazin'. So I was like, you know what? That's pretty cool. And I've worked professionally for ESPN, which is like the equivalent of Sky Sports here. And so I worked for them doing radio for 2 or 3 years exclusively. And so I'm pretty familiar with it. And we end up going in the first day, and it's like, it's our booth, all the microphones, the switchboard and everything is in there with no operator. So it was just like, here you guys go, good luck. So I had to learn how to run the board the first day, pretty much.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up being kind of a little more dominant, because I was more comfortable, I think, in the setting than my friend who was originally pitched the show. And so he had some problems and had to leave, and it eventually just became where it was me by myself in the booth. And we were called the Wise Dabs Show before, because his last name he went by was Dabs, Tony Dabs. And so it was both our names combined. So once he left, I was like, well, I need to call it something else. So I was like, I'm just going to go with the Mike Wise Show. There's been moments where I had contemplating changing it because it's easier to gain traction online. Once I shifted to like an online page, it's easier to get people to follow your page if it's like Weed Radio, if that's the name of my page. But I decided to keep it hard, make it hard on myself, because I always do that. And I just called it the Mike Wise Show, and I kept with that. And since then, though, I want to say that it helped really to get my name out worldwide, other than this where I was in Colorado. And now we had people listening from all over the world. So I enjoy it, and I like to be true to what I'm doing, and so it's my show. There's been a lot of people trying to sway my message one way or the other, and in the beginning I had some sponsors, and I'm just like, no, it's my show, so I'm going to do what I want, and I'm going to talk about what I want, which is why I had to leave the radio station actually, because they wanted me to dumb down my content. And everybody who was listening was sending me positive stuff. So I thought it was stupid, and I was like, no, I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to change what I'm talking about. And since then it's been awesome, because I try to really just put content that is heavily focused on the benefits of cannabis for medical use. I don't ever try to post anything that's sensationalist or
Clickbait or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's great that you also have full control over the whole show. So it truly is the Mike Wise show in every sense of the words. That's, first of all, really great. And I also think the more content we can put out there, the more people can understand all the applications this plant can have, the better.
You're absolutely right, though. I mean, Jack Harris said it could change the world. And if people knew all the uses and how it's not a deadly psychotic thing, which, they're coming around to, we can really see some change and see some industries kind of revolutionize if they want to go the greener, truly greener route. The options are hopefully going to be available soon.
Hopefully, yeah, yeah. Speaking of Jack Harris, I actually saw your post on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago where you're loaning out a framed picture of the last autograph ever done from Jack Harris to the Marijuana, Hash, and Hemp Museum in Amsterdam. First of all, that's awesome. And secondly, how did you end up acquiring that autograph?
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things that I own, especially when it comes to anything I have regarding cannabis. It's the coolest thing I have. I was so honored to be able to get it. It was fortunate for me, not fortunate for the seller. Times have been tough in the US. A very well-known author who's been writing books on cannabis for decades now from the US, which is rare because, cannabis was heavily criminalized until recently in the US. So to write about it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago is revolutionary. And this was one of such authors. He goes by Farmer in the Sky. He acquired this from someone. If you don't know the story behind Jack and what led to his demise, is he was so passionate. He was speaking at an event called Hempstalk, and all the time he would speak, he would always get very kind of angry and passionate about what he's speaking about, because he knew the truth, and he hated knowing the truth while other people don't, because all he did was research. Much of what we know today is thanks to Jack's research, and others that helped research with him. And so he needed money to pay for his rent, unfortunately. And I was able to bid on this, and I won the auction. And I'll explain a little bit about it. It's a signed poster from Hempstalk, the event. And so what happened was Jack Harris signed this poster and then walked up on stage, gave his speech. And as soon as he got behind the curtains backstage, he collapsed from a heart attack, I believe. So he did live for some time after this, but I don't think he really signed any autographs while he was sick. So this was kind of like the last one he signed before his unfortunate health issue. Even when I was just bidding on it, I told Farmer in the Sky, I told him, look, if I win this, I'm going to put this on loan to the museum in Amsterdam because I believe people should see it. And so true to my word, it's on loan. It should be displayed hopefully in a month or so, available for people to go check out. It's just a really cool piece of history. Like Russ Belville's on there. I think Los Marihuanos signed it also.
Oh, cool.
It's like a cool piece. To me, it's so nostalgic because we're so used to living in a time where cannabis is almost legalized, and it's completely different to live in this time, And so when I can see a glimpse from the past, it just amazes me. I was thrilled to own it.
Yeah, I know, I can imagine. Absolutely. I'm actually going to be interviewing Caravan, the curator of the museum. I think he's in the photo with you. I'll mention it to him as well. It'll be quite interesting to hear it from his perspective. But yeah, I mean, you've come from the States and now you live in Europe. How would you like to see the cannabis industry enter Europe?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and probably one that's the hardest for me to answer because there's so many possibilities. I would like to see there pretty much be no restrictions on cannabis, and a lot of people will say, oh, well, what about spraying the plants with poisonous pesticides or something like this? And I say, well, that's putting a restriction on a pesticide. That's not putting a restriction on cannabis.
Quite a smart way of putting it.
Well, it's one of the first things the naysayers will tell me. I would like to see this type of wide open availability for the public to be able to grow and consume and process the plant freely at the same time as an industry develops. And so most of the people regarding cannabis only want to talk about the industry developing, where I want to see the home brew, the home crafting industry develop. I want to see everyone be able to use this, like my slogan, patience over profits. A lot of times, myself included, when I needed this oil, I didn't have the money to go buy it. I had to make it, and it wasn't even available even if I wanted to buy it. So when you can allow people to have the option to grow and process the medicine themselves instead of forcing people to only be able to purchase it from a store, are kind of two completely separate avenues. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in the United States is if there is a home growing statute or a law that permits home growing, almost immediately from that law or statute being passed or that ordinance being put in place, politicians are coming in to restrict that ordinance and change the law, restrict it basically, and make it harder for patients to do
what they need to do.
Exactly. And so...
Wasn't that the case in Colorado?
Oh, yes. Colorado's gotten so bad. We, the people, passed a referendum which gave us cannabis. And it said everyone can grow 99 plants if you have a medical card. And the doctor says it's okay. Now the politicians changed that law that we, the people, voted on and made to say that you can only have 12 plants per house, no matter what medical condition you're treating and no matter how many medical patients live in that house. And only 6 of those plants can be in flower at a time. The other 6 have to be in veg. It's completely insane. We, the people, aren't paid by anybody. We wanted cannabis, so we made a law that allows it. While the politicians are paid by big businesses. And so, unfortunately, in Colorado, we see cannabis businesses joining with the alcohol and tobacco lobby, working with politicians to restrict the rights of patients. The people that came in on our backs and our law that we helped them to pass now made millions of dollars and are using that money to restrict our rights so that we can only go to them to buy this plant instead of being able to grow it ourselves. It's maddening, really.
It is a bit scary, I'm also worried about these big cannabis and pharmaceutical companies taking over the industry. How do you think we could stop that from happening in Europe?
I think it has to be done on a national scale. Nation by nation is going to have to choose what they're going to want to allow and what they're not going to allow. The EU as a whole is probably going to be like the US FDA, and they're probably going to try to hold out as long as they can to keep it illegal. Yeah, and so I guess if you just have an efficient organization, with that comes everything. There's a huge organization here in Poland, and they organize marches.
Oh, was it Wolnia Konopie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke to Natalia Janusz, who works with Wolnia Konopie. I think it was episode 8, and she was saying all the good stuff they're actually doing out there and all the different demonstrations they're actually doing. So yeah, I totally agree. It's really, really important.
Exactly. So really, that's what it's going to come down to, is the passion of individuals to organize as a whole. And, we're consenting adults. We want to grow a plant that has never harmed anybody. That's what we always talk about. They want to say psychosis and all these crazy things about cannabis being deadly, but facts are facts. It's been used for thousands of years. There's been 0 deaths. Tobacco use alone has over 400,000 deaths annually. So it's not a safety issue. I don't need someone who's never met me to tell me what's safe or not for me. At this point, I'm 33 years old. I should know what's safe for me to use and not use. And it's a medical thing too, It's like, so what right does a politician have to tell me what I can use to treat something that he's never even met me and he has no idea about my condition? So what right does he have to tell me I can use or what I can't use?
No, absolutely. You just hope these politicians won't be looking at the dollar signs or the euro signs, and will actually listen to people. But if you're trying to be active in your community and tell the government what it is you want, hopefully they will listen.
Yeah, I mean, some of these places, they might have like a referendum type of scenario. There's ways to do it, and organizing is always going to be the only way, we can make our own laws, really. As much as we vote for certain people, they're always going to have their own interests.
Their own agendas. Yeah. It's definitely going to be a challenge. But yeah, there's power in numbers. So get together, get organized, and hopefully we can do something about it. So what's actually been your biggest challenge you've had to face so far?
As an activist, financial obstacles was pretty tough to overcome. The combination of financial struggles along with breaking into, I don't want to say the mainstream, but breaking into the cannabis conversation as an outsider while ignoring corporate money has been extremely tough, So the toughest thing has been putting in the hours each day by myself to put the message out, but it's paid off.
I was going to say, are you starting to finally reap the benefits of your labor?
Yeah, I'm starting to be able to put less time in, thankfully, which is nice. But really, the best benefit of all is getting the messages of people telling me how they're cured. And I get messages too from other caregivers that'll say, oh, well, I learned everything from watching your videos, And of course, I'm sure they learned other things from other people, after, but I might have been the catalyst and I might have been the one to get them into making medicine for other people. So to get messages like that and to know that the world is changing and eyes are opening, and although it may not be as quick as I'd like, it really is rewarding for me to know that I am making a difference, one person at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that things are slowly going in the right direction. Okay, well, I think I've only got one last question for you, Mike, which I ask all my guests. If you could go back in time, is there anything you would do differently?
Only in my lifetime or at any time?
I mean, you've put a little twist on it. Usually I would say your own lifetime, but I mean, I'll give you free reins to do whatever you want.
If I could go back in time, I'd go back and create the Mike Wise Show in the 1930s when Harry Anslinger was doing yellow journalism and reefer madness. And I would be keeping the message alive about how farmers all across the United States are planting cannabis and have been for quite some time, and how in the United States colonies, there was actually a law that forced every person to grow cannabis because it was needed to get our reliance off of England. So I guess I would love to go back then and this kind of be pushing the same message I'm pushing now and saying, hey, this isn't bad. Don't let bad people tell you that it's bad.
What a world we'd be living in now if that was the case. So it would be quite nice if there was a bit of a counterculture in the 1930s or a cannabis culture. I'm sure the world would be a slightly different place now.
Oh, man.
Nice. So where can our listeners find out more about you and what you do?
Really, Facebook's my number one place. It's just facebook.com/Mike Wise Show. The same on YouTube, Mike Wise Show. Instagram, Mike Wise Show. LinkedIn, I think I'm this Mike Wise. Oh yeah, and of course OGLabsGenetics.com is my website. I like to tell people I answer all messages. So if you have a question about cannabis and you want to know if you're treating a certain condition or something and you'd like to know about it, send me a message to my page on Facebook. If you're in dire straits or you know somebody who is and they need the medicine now, always the quickest and only way to get any oil from me is via my website, OGLabsGenetics.com.
Okay, great. Nice. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Dude, thank you for having me. I appreciated it. It was fun chatting about a little bit different things than I normally talk about.
So, that was Mike Wise, who just shared his fascinating story as well as his insights into cannabis activism and cannabis reform. If you want to check out his show, go to Facebook and type The Mike Wise Show. Wise is spelled W-I-S-E. You can also find his videos on YouTube. Again, just type The Mike Wise Show. And if you want to find out more about his products, go to www.oglabsgenetics.com. Also, please do remember to subscribe to this podcast if you like what you hear, and do check out our website at www.smellslikebusiness.com. I've been your host, Tom. Have a green day, everybody.
Business. Smell like business. Business. Smell like business. Business. Smell like business. Business. Smell smells like business.